I'm thrilled to be here because, as Kathy said, I left about 8 years ago, but I was here for 6 years as the middle school counselor, and really have a very fond connection to this community. So I'm happy to be here. Let me ask you, my area of specialty is adolescence, developmentally speaking, but I tried to make this cover the developmental span. And how many of you have elementary school kids, lower school kids? Okay, how many middle school? How many upper school, high school? Okay, so what I want to say is that I'm going to focus more on adolescents, but one of the things that has helped me actually also as a parent, I have a almost 9-year-old and an 11-year-old, 2 boys. And when you can see what's coming, it helps you plant seeds so when you get there, you're a little bit more prepared. So I think there's going to be something in this for everybody as far as all ages go. All right, so what I'd like to get done today is go through the stages of social development and also talk about specifically what makes adolescence so unique. Define social culture and how culture shapes attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. I am a big believer that decision-making happens in a context. And understanding what that context looks like can really help us as adults and parents to have conversations with kids that are really productive and really understanding the world that they're in. And so that's what I'm hoping you'll get from today. I'm also going to talk about how bullying happens and how social culture, the elements of social culture, can lead to social aggression and bullying. We'll talk about that. And then I'm going to talk, at the end, I have discussion about how you can talk to and support your kids through social difficulties, challenges, how to be steps ahead, and hopefully we'll have some good conversation at that point as well, and I can hear from you. So I wanted to start with sharing with you that there's a big push across the nation in education with social emotional learning. And the organization, CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, has done a lot of research on what makes people successful. And what they have found, which probably is no surprise to any of us in this room, is that it's not the specific content areas that kids are learning in the classroom. It's how they're learning to learn, which is such a great, McLean has such a great focus on that. Understanding yourself as a learner, as a student, the process piece of it, and also other social emotional skill sets. So what they have found is that these different areas of skill sets are really the biggest contributors to success. So we really want kids to know how to be effective in self-management, which requires self-awareness, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. And so it's really all about the relationship. And as a matter of fact, my colleague and I are writing a book for professionals about how to develop really effective relationships when working with teenagers, because we really believe that that is your best tool. So this is sort of my summary of the different stages of social development, but I want to read you this quote that it just is so powerful to me. Social intelligence can reduce conflict, create collaboration, replace bigotry and polarization with understanding, and mobilize people toward common goals. Indeed, it may be, in the long run, the most important ingredient in our survival as a species. Does anybody know who Carl Albrecht is? He's an entrepreneur. He's a businessman and a very successful billionaire who is a man of ideas. He is all about innovation and ideas, and so this is not a psychologist or a developmental specialist. This is coming from a businessman who has does a ton of training on management and effective business, but what he has found in his experience is that social intelligence and knowing how to relate to people and utilize a lot of the skills that we talked about on the previous slide make or break in terms of kids being successful. So let's just go through these, and then we're going to talk about the adolescence piece in more detail. So in early childhood, kids are really learning the skills of play. They're going from that parallel process to a more interactive process. And largely, younger kids are making friends with kids who are within their proximity. So kids who are in their classes, or they're in sports with, or they're in the neighborhood, or family friends. And so, parents have, a large hand in who their kids are interacting with at this young stage. Also in childhood, during elementary school years, during the early elementary school years, there's still proximity and family connections are still guiding a lot of social interactions. And then as kids get, later into 4th, 5th, 6th grade, they are making many more of the choices on their own about who they're friends with, and a lot of it is common interest and who they're drawn to. But this is where social culture, late sort of elementary school, 4th, 5th, into the adolescence, is where kids begin to make decisions about their friendships by looking around to see what everybody else is doing and what's important to everybody else. So early adolescence is when, typically 6th grade, I don't know if any of you have experienced this, but lots of friendships that have been, ongoing since kids were little. Some of them end, change, kids start to sort of develop in different ways at this stage, and once they get to middle school, it's one of the things that makes it so unique and challenging. So a lot of times you'll have a kid who has had the same best friend since, they were 2, and all of a sudden that friend is not wanting to hang out with them anymore, or they're brushing them off, so those begin to be more of the challenges in middle school. And then once you get into sort of 8th grade and up into high school, kids have much more control over who they're friends with. It's really their choice. Parents have not no say, but much less say about who your kids are friends with. And groups are more solidified usually by then, and kids kind of have their pack that they run in. And what I also notice in my work, and I share this with especially middle schoolers who feel like they're so stuck in this middle school world and it's never going to get better. And I always tell them, by high school, really particularly by junior and senior year, individuality is much more appreciated. And so there is less of a pack mentality, and people can be themselves and be more genuine and authentic, which is really the goal. We want kids to find themselves and be true to who they are. Okay. So I want to talk a minute about the adolescent brain, because there's some very unique characteristics of growth that go on during adolescence. Is anybody familiar with Jay Geed's work here at the NIH? So Jay Geed has done a longitudinal study on using fMRIs, functional MRIs, brain scans, to study the adolescent brain. And he found some very interesting data. What he found, that before his work, it was largely understood and believed that the brain had done a lot of the changing that it was going to do by adolescence. And what his work showed was that other than the first year of life, adolescence is the time when the brain structurally changes the most. And what happens is, before adolescence, pre-adolescence, the brain sort of as far as the neurons, the mass of neurons increases. And then during adolescence, what happens is there's this pruning process. So it's a little bit of use it or lose it. So what kids don't really need anymore gets pruned away, and the skills that kids are using and the behaviors that they're engaging in gets shored up and solidified as far as the neurological connections go. So, I have had parents who come to my office and they're like, we're at our wits' end. Is it too late? They're already 15. What can we do? And I always say it's not. Like, this is such a critical time period to start shaping things or continue to shape things, because the brain really is changing in very important ways. So there's also this, the amygdala, which is the sort of base, in the base of your brain, is the emotional center, is very hypervigilant during adolescence. It's hypersensitive, which is why teenagers are so emotionally reactive to things, because their amygdalas really are overactive during adolescence. And the prefrontal cortex, which is like the front part of your brain, it's the CEO of your brain. It's the metacognition center. It's the forethought, planning, organizing, thinking things through in steps, is far from fully developed. So what you get is this competition between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. And sad to say that the prefrontal cortex loses pretty much every time, which is why you as parents feel like you act as your kid's prefrontal cortexes like a large amount of the time. So that it's important just to remember that. So kids are not trying to be a pain in the neck. It really, like neurologically speaking, they are fighting their neurology during this time period. And the other thing to remember is that experiences, like I said before about the pruning, shape the brain. So there's this concept called neuroplasticity. What we do, the experiences we have, are what create the neurological connections. And so it's literally shaping the brain, so that there's this neurological, flexibility that happens based on the experiences that we have. This is why we want to make sure that kids are not, overly using substances. Well, we don't want them to use it at all, but let's be real. I don't know that we can prevent everything. But, like if kids have addiction issues and they're not functioning well, it's critical that we intervene, because this is where their brain is getting kind of shaped so significantly. This is where we want them to have the right learning strategies and the right coping strategies so they can experience things positively, and that's what gets sort of seared in there. Any questions about this? Okay. So now I'm going to move into the pieces about culture. What do adolescents think? So I do trainings also with groups of teenagers, and there's an exercise I do called 4 corners. And in each corner of the room, I put up a sign, definitely, most of the time, sometimes, or almost never, never, not really at all. And this is actually a really interesting exercise to do with them. I'll tell you why in a minute. So I ask them questions one by one, and I have them walk to the place in the room that they think describes the statement. So what's interesting about it when you do it this way is that everyone's looking around the room. They're trying to figure out, and I always know who's socially in charge in these exercises because I see people looking toward that person to see where they're going to go. It gives me a sense of how the social dynamics are in the room, and it's really interesting. And some kids are super independent and really go with what's true for them, and other kids are really looking to see where do I go? So the first question, there's all kinds of different questions that you can ask, but this is one that I did recently. And I did this with high school kids. So this wasn't a middle school question, just so you know. There's a double standard for boys and girls with regard to hooking up. This happens. I mean, high schoolers are, friends with benefits, all kinds of things that we all cringe when we hear it, but it's happening, and we have to be able to have conversations with kids about it. So where do you think they go? Where do you think most of the kids go on this first one? Definitely. So because hooking up for boys is status building, and hooking up for girls is, And it's a mixed bag for girls, as we will see, because they're expected to get attention from boys, But they have to figure out how to do that, and that's one way that they figure out how to do that. Okay, so the next one is, there is a clear social hierarchy at my school. Where do you think kids go on this one? Say it again.
The ones who are like with the main person hardly ever, and the ones that aren't go to the definitely or most of the time.
Did everyone hear that? That's exactly right. That's exactly right. So the kids who are in control, who are the powerful kids, go to hardly ever. Why? Why do they do that?
Because it's not
confidence.
Right. There's no. They are the hierarchy.
Yeah, there's no problem for them. Nor do they want the status quo messed with. They don't want it messed with because they are in the seats of power, and equality to them is not to say that they're fundamentally against human equality, but in this social context, they like being in charge. They like having the power.
It's good to be them.
It's good to be the king or
And
queen.
they're not constrained.
Right. That's right. And they want to be in charge. They don't want the adults to come in and impose anything upon their culture because they have it all kind of mapped out. So the next one is, people at our school are treated differently depending on what social group they are in. Where do you think kids go on this one?
Sometimes.
They do. They veer in the middle more. And some of them are kind of wavering between, and they have all kinds of why. They're reasoning about it. And so the key word here is, differently. So when they see differently, I don't think that they characterize it necessarily as better or worse. They just say, well, there's different social groups and different kids, we gravitate toward the friends who we have things in common with, but we don't think anybody is any better or not better than anybody else. And you know what? In some communities, that is true. And they do have their groups based on interest and things like that, but they mix and mingle, and they don't. And in other communities, it's not the case. In other communities, certain groups, clearly in a hierarchy, supersede other groups. And then the last two are, girls are judged by what they wear. Where do they go? Definitely. But there's always a handful of the boys who are kind of clueless. And they're, sometimes, or they just don't realize. And then the last one, boys are judged by what they wear. What do you think happens there? Sometimes. You know what? More and more for boys, it's not about appearance per se, but labels. If that makes, the brands, which we'll see. We'll see how this all works in a minute. Okay, so the next exercise that I have done with lots of different age groups of kids, it's really interesting, is I tell everybody to put their heads down. Close your eyes, put your head down. And I look at I make sure everybody's heads are down. And I say, raise your hand if a friend has ever treated you nicely, one-on-one, and then been mean to you in a group. How many hands do you think go up? Most. 90%, I would guess. The hands go up. And then you have an opportunity to talk to them about, well, why does that happen? How come that happens? You all have experienced it. Does anybody like it? Raise your hand if you like being treated that way. Nobody raises their hand. They don't know why it happens. We'll see in a minute why it happens. And then the second one is, again, close your eyes, raise your hand if you have felt hurt about the way someone has treated you and not spoken up about it. Most of the time.
Yeah.
Now, when in single-sex groups, when you do this, the girls raise their hand way more than the boys do. Do you know why? So, boy code is, not to be too expressive about things that are hurtful. And we'll see how that happens too in a minute. I have an exercise. It's a really interesting exercise. So, and then the last one is, you have felt uncomfortable by the way a friend of yours was being treated, but you didn't say anything. How many hands go up then? A lot of them. Mm-hmm. So, kids operate in this social culture where there's different pressures to do or not do certain things, or say or not say certain things, or have certain relationships and not have certain relationships, but they don't always understand why or how that happens. So I talk to kids about culture and understanding that things happen in the context of a social culture. So the dictionary definition of culture is the customary beliefs and social norms of a racial, religious, or social group. And the real world definition is everything we know but have never been sat down and taught. And we all know, based on our own kids and other kids we see and observe, that there are some kids who don't need to be sat down and taught and know every single social nuance there is. And there are other kids who do not have any clue about what that culture is about and everything in between. So I have always felt like it's hugely important for kids to understand what I have always called their social landscape so they can navigate it. They have to understand what's real and decide what's important to them and what's not important to them. But they need to understand the reality of it. So what shapes culture? Well, traditional and stereotypical notions of gender expectations are a big one. And you'll see in a minute how that happens. Media influences, which reinforce a lot of these traditional gender expectations, and the home, school, and community environments. So we have an opportunity to counter the messages that they're getting that may not be driving them toward the best decision making and conclusions. And so we'll talk about that also later in the program.
In that order?
No, not necessarily. Not necessarily in that order at all. I feel like we have the reason, I do train on this is because I feel like as adults and important critical adults in their lives, parents, coaches, teachers, like school personnel, other friends' parents, we have such an opportunity to talk to them about this stuff without judging, without blaming, without creating a defensive response. And when we understand that this is not, a kid just being a bad kid, it helps us, I think, to have more productive conversations with them. So good question, yes. So for masculinity, the dictionary definition is having qualities associated with a man. And the boy world definition is good body, always wants attention from girls, always competitive, has money, can't complain, never takes things too seriously, and able to discuss professional sports with authority. You can see how the sort of more traditional stereotypical notions of masculinity play in that definition. So I'm going to show you an example. Bear with me for a second.
Look at you, so dashing. Come on. Nowadays, lots of people go by themselves.
No, they don't.
Yeah. Hey, son. Have fun tonight.
This was one of the Super Bowl ads from last year.
Braver.
What other words come to mind?
Where's the alcohol?
Where's the alcohol?
Risk.
Risk. What else?
Living in the Middle Ages.
Yeah. We're all living in the Middle Ages.
Jeez. Parental judgment.
Okay, parental judgment. In that situation, the parent was really supporting the culture, this sort of notion of masculinity, right?
Well, look at his wife. Oh, honey.
Oh, honey, right. And even the little sister knew the norms, social norms. Oh, honey, don't worry. People go to the prom all the time by themselves now. No, they don't. The little girl, no, they don't. So, okay, we're going to get to this in a little bit more detail in a minute, but let's do the femininity. The dictionary definition is the quality or nature of the female sex, and the girl world definition is the right body, guys like you, in control, not uptight, and smart enough to get people to do what you want, especially without them noticing. Okay, I don't have a video clip for you on this one. When I did this very similar presentation for the middle school and upper school faculty here recently, we watched one of Miley Cyrus's music videos, and we had a really interesting and fantastic discussion about social culture based on that example from the media. So, did anybody see the AMAs? The American Music Awards, when Miley Cyrus performed, and she performed with Alan Thicke after her own solo, her kitty cat solo that I have no idea still what that was all about. But what'd you say?
I said Robin Thicke.
I'm sorry, Robin Thicke. Alan is his dad.
Yes.
Okay, Robin Thicke.
Well, it was repeated everywhere too.
Yeah,
You didn't have to see the awards.
You didn't have, it's
The
true.
awards, but
It
got to
was
see it
everywhere. So you can see here that, well, let me ask you. And then the bottom one is Katy Perry. So it's a different tone. But what words come to mind as far as what you think girls would take from these media role models, as far as the words you would use to describe what they would expect to have to be? Words, any words? Sexy.
Yeah.
Promiscuous.
Promiscuous. Right? Bold. Expressive.
It's confident, but it's not the confident proper way. Because to do that, you have to have an inner somehow.
That's right.
confidence. But
It's
it's not the confident that I will want my girl.
Confidence,
Right.
but a
It's
provocative
a
kind of
provocative
confidence.
Right.
Okay,
All
right.
you have to be to do.
Katy Perry looks sort of unhealthy, with the big black around the eyes.
Mm-hmm.
They both look feline.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Looks aggressive to me.
Yeah. You can take all kinds of things, but this is just one of many examples of media about the messages that kids get in terms of what is cool, what they're supposed to be like. This media, again, it's not the end-all be-all, but it is an important piece for us to understand. And it's not, I don't get into this to, say that we should restrict it. You can't. You can't limit the world that your kids live in. But we can
talk about it.
Exactly. We can know enough to challenge their notions. So, my son was listening to a song yesterday, a 2 Chainz song that I am sort of repulsed by, and there's one part of it that is, really, and I said, Jonathan, you got to turn this off, because he doesn't have a ton of explicit songs, just one here and there, whatever. But, and he said, Mom, I like the music, and you hear this from a lot of kids, I like the music, they sound really good, but I don't agree with what they're saying, and I don't like what they're saying. And I said, that's a really important distinction. And I said, I think a lot of people feel that way. I wouldn't say that these guys aren't talented, but they are, saying things that you have to ask yourself, do you buy that or do you not buy it? Do you agree with it or do you not agree with it? Kids need to know where they stand. So it is important to have those conversations with kids. One of the music teachers here in the training that I did recently said that sometimes when kids beg to play some of these pop, rap, whatever, songs, he first has them analyze the lyrics. And he said, once they do that, they're not interested anymore. So I thought that was a brilliant example of not pulling it away, but making it thought-provoking for them. Okay, so here is an exercise that I do all the time, and this comes from the Owning Up curriculum that Rosalind Wiseman developed, and she is the author of Queen Bees and Wannabes and the new book about boys. Kingpin, I can't even think of it. Does anybody know the title? Wingmen and Kingpins and Wingmen. It's about the boys, and it's a great book. So, but this is an exercise that I have done a lot of times, and it's a really interesting one. I'm going to do it with you, and then I have like the answers that typically kids give. So, So we'll start with the boys. So the first question that I ask with regard to boys, and I've done this in mixed groups with boys and girls, and also just the single-sex groups. What does a boy look like, act like, have to be like to get respect from his peers? What are the words that come to mind? We've said some of them already, so you can repeat them.
Confidence.
Confidence.
Good looking.
Good looking. Athletic. Anything you can think of.
Cool.
Cool. What would make boys seem cool to other boys?
Having girls.
Getting girls.
Risky behavior.
Risky behavior.
Having the latest stuff.
Having the latest stuff. All right, let's see how boys typically answer. And before I show you this, I just want to say the beauty of this exercise is that it looks a little different in any different community. This exercise is about kids telling me in this exercise, or whoever's doing it with them, what their culture looks like, what is valued in their culture. And so it has a lot of different things depending on the group of kids. And then you use the box, to talk to them about, well, how important is this to you, and all of that. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is what typically, I don't know why the boys went away, but that's all right. These are typically the answers. You guys got a lot of them. Gets girls, confident, athletic, in control, money, risk taker. But the important thing about being the risk taker is that you're the kid who doesn't really get caught ever.
Right.
You are smooth enough to get away with it. Good style, right gear. Don't take things too seriously. Smooth talker. Good in school, but not stressed out about it. All right? So then the next question for boys is, what does a boy look like, act like? What does he have to be like or what is he like when he is not respected by his peers? So what are the words that come to mind?
Quiet.
Quiet.
Geek.
Geek.
Nerdy.
Nerdy.
Clumsy.
What words do you think they all use? Because I asked them to tell me the words they
Awful
use.
dresser.
Say it again.
Awful dresser. Like someone doesn't dress
Awful.
in style.
Yeah, like an awful dresser, somebody who doesn't have the right style.
Loser.
Loser.
And I don't mean this pejoratively, but gay.
Yes. Gay. That is the word that they use to torture each other. It's gay for boys and fat for girls. We'll get into that in a minute. Anything else?
Wimpy.
They talk
Wimpy.
About, they actually talk about the body types.
Right. So like not in shape, not having a lot of muscles, not developed.
Right.
Skinny. Scrawny.
That's what saying body types. Skinny.
Yes.
Or overweight.
Or overweight.
Not into sports.
Not into sports. Okay, so say it again.
Lame.
Lame. Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That-
lame.
Mm-hmm. All right, so here's what they say. My pictures are going away. Tries too hard, like a girl, gay, fag. Can't take a joke. Not into or too into video games, that comes up. The wrong style, weak, slow, won't take risks. Not into sports. Too sensitive, fat, bad skin, or too serious, poor. Like takes things too seriously. over emotional. Which is, remember the trap that I talked about earlier that boys feel in, where they can't express, like they're permitted to express anger, but they're not permitted to express anything that would put them in the category of being weak. Boys test each other all the time to see if they can take a joke, how far can I push you before you lose it. And so this is the culture that they get trapped in, and it's not easy. So I recently did this activity with a group of 8th grade boys, and one of the boys said, I thought this was so awesome. He was like, now I know why I do a lot of the stupid things that I do. And that's the point of this. Like, we want them to examine their decision making and know what's driving it so they can actually stop and think, wait, is that really what I want to do? Or, am I just getting caught up in the mix of the culture stuff? Okay, so I'm sorry about the next one is girls. The question for girls is, what do girls look like, act like, have to be like to have high social status?
Body shape.
Skinny.
What?
Yeah.
What if skinny?
Yeah, skinny.
Boobs.
Attractive.
Boobs.
Good hair.
Yeah, having the right curves,
Right
hair, the
clothes.
right hair,
Hair is going for
Right clothes.
the right clothes, attractive,
gadgets too. The gadgets.
Smart.
Money.
money.
There's like Facebook status,
Style.
like how many likes they get.
How many likes you get, exactly. Gets lots of attention. What else?
Smart
And
but not
Can get
dirty.
people- Right.
smart but not nerdy.
And can get people to do what they want them to do without them
Yes.
noticing pretty much.
In charge. Can get people to do what they want them to do. Without being,
Bossy.
Bossy, pushy.
that's a lot of girls use that word to box other girls out, I will say, keep other girls out of the box. That they're being too bossy.
Cool clothes.
Cool clothes. So many of the things that came up are appearance related. So you guys noticed that, right? Okay, so here it is. Pretty. Popular means you are known. The likes on Facebook is one example. Thin but the right curves. You guys are so good. You got them all. Nice hair. Athletic but not bulky and not better than the boys. Confident. Money, right style, in control, gets good grades but not too smart. So, and then the flip question is, what do girls look like, act like, what are they like if they don't have high social status? So what are the words that come to mind then for that question? Ugly,
Bossy.
bossy, quiet, bitchy, fat,
Too smart.
too smart, wrong clothes,
Nerdy.
nerdy,
Bad skin.
bad skin,
I mean, bad hair.
bad hair.
Tough.
Tough. And so when you think of, like, when other kids think about a girl who's like really tough or like more masculine, what's the word that they use? Dyke, butch,
Not smart.
not smart. Okay, here we are. Or too smart. Tries too hard, follows or copies, right? Like the wannabe. This is so typical. Anybody have 6th grade girls in this room? Okay. Have you ever heard your 6th grade girl say, "She's copying me"?
No.
This is so typical of 6th grade girls in particular. I don't know. I mean, this is where they're really trying to be enough of their own person, but be enough like other people. And they, it depends on who. They're not upset if certain people are copying them, but other people can't.
Or if they're copying somebody.
Or if they're copying somebody. Right, exactly.
The same, though.
Bad skin, wrong hair, poor, bitch. Bitch can be in or out depending on the community and the perception of the word.
And the degree of bitchiness.
And the degree of bitchiness, thank you. Yes. That's very important. You can't go too over the line.
You need some to get what you need to
Right,
get done.
right, that's right. Too masculine, butch, lesbian. Dependent, or like a lot of times girls say clingy. This person's so clingy. Slut. Slut can be in or out, by the way, depending, again, on the degree.
Mm-hmm.
You can't, like, this is so hard for girls. I just really feel for them. You have to be slutty enough, but not too slutty. It's like, it's very difficult. It's really hard to live in this world.
A few years ago, that word was being used as sort of like a greeting, like for fun.
Yo, hi slut.
Yeah.
Yeah. And again, it depends on the community. So when you do this exercise with any particular group of kids, they tell you what are in the box qualities and what are out of the box qualities. And these are not, hard and fast rules. These are typical answers. But the beauty of the exercise is that you really can get different answers in different groups of kids.
Well, and I think it's not just different communities value different things, but the words actually have different meanings.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. And then you get to sort of pick it apart with them and ask them about it and what, how do you interpret that and what does that look like and how do you know if a person is or isn't and all of these great questions that you can engage in with kids. So cold prude, that's the other thing. Like you can't be too cold, prudy. Fat, wrong style, and uptight. Okay, so the important thing to understand about this exercise and what I say to kids is that, because everybody's looking at this and trying to figure out where they fit. Where am I? Am I in the box? Am I out of the box? Am I on the edge of the box? Am I smack in the middle of the box? This exercise is not about where particular kids fit in these boxes. It is a way for them to understand what defines their social culture, ask themselves how important this box is or is not to them, and how much does this box drive and shape their attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors about relationships, friendships, and the way that they expect themselves and others to behave. So you kind of have to accept that this is the culture, but you don't have to let it drive everything you do. And I ask kids all the time, who decides the culture? And after they've just told me everything, they get it. They say, oh, we do. And I'm like, yeah, you do. You get to decide this. You get to decide what things are really important, what qualities should be in the box and what qualities should be outside of the box. And, there are plenty of kids who say, like, nice in the box, goes in the box, and, other things. But those tend to be the outlier kids who aren't they're not box driven, which is good. It's good that they're not totally driven by this box. But I love this because I just feel like it gives me such a concrete framework to understand why kids do the things they do. And we have to validate the pressures of their culture. And validation does not mean agreement or acceptance of a particular thought, behavior, or whatever. It just means that you're saying, I understand why this is so powerful for you.
So on average, I don't know whether you conduct this with just individual classes or grades or schools or whatever, but how many kids, what percentage of kids are box kids versus kids who don't want to be in the box?
Way more of the majority of kids value the box without even realizing they value the box before we do this than the kids who don't. The kids who don't value the box tend to be the kids who are a little bit more oblivious to the social culture. They don't value the box because they don't realize the box. If that makes sense. Yeah.
And can it change, like I'm thinking about, kids who maybe here at school or at their school kind of live by one set of norms, if you will, in a box, but then in their outside activities or a group that they're associated with, whether it's a team or some group, that I would think that it would change. And
yes,
how
it does.
Difficult is it?
It does. And kids know that, and they have to shift gears and shift their behaviors, their expectations, and their attitudes based on what culture they're in at any given moment. Yes, they do. This is very complicated. And let me tell you, there are boxes within boxes. Each individual little social group has its own box. it behooves us to understand these dynamics. You know, so when we talk to kids, we're coming at it from a tempered, sort of balanced way, instead of just, you know, addressing and responding to a particular behavior that we all know in and of itself in isolation is a bad behavior. But we need to understand what motivates kids to do what they do. And yes, it's a lot of times if I go like to a private school and do something like this with the kids, they'll say, well, are we doing this, should I answer for here or should I answer for my old school?
Yeah.
They know the difference. It's a good point, really good point. It also can change from like year to year, age to age. You can do this exercise with kids in 7th grade and do it again with the same group in 9th grade and it'll look different.
Has anybody done it over a long period of time? I mean, because frankly, I look at this and I'm really pleased to see that SMART is valued.
Mm-hmm.
Not my experience growing up in middle school and high school. So has anybody looked at some of these things and how they changed over decades?
No, and it's an interesting, really interesting question to see how, is there sort of a longitudinal way to do this with a similar group of people? And the other thing too is that, just for the kids that I end up working with are not inner city kids who are, it's different in different communities. And so different things are valued in different places. Not to say SMART wouldn't be valued in an inner city community, but the interesting thing is to compare, different populations and see what it overlaps and what doesn't. If that makes sense. Okay. So that's the purpose. That is the purpose of this exercise. Is that you want kids to examine this question. So let's talk about the importance and the role of adults outside the family. So parents have a really important role in talking to your kids about, their decision making, their behaviors. Like, so-and-so was your friend last week. How come you don't want to invite them, to out tonight? And it's so complicated. I mean, I see it with my own kids, my 5th grader more than my 3rd grader at this point. And so we have to figure out also, as kids grow up and get more into adolescence and are less with us and more out in the world, how do we help them utilize the resources that they have as far as adults that are not, parent, guardian, caretakers, primary caretakers. And one of the things that's really critical that I am a huge believer in is school climate. Every school has a different culture and a different feel. And the things that get reinforced or not reinforced in a particular school environment make a big difference about how kids act, because there's accountability in different ways in different places. And so that's really important. So you want to know, like, what's the culture of the school? What are the norms? What are the expectations? How do things get reinforced? What are the messages that get sent about what's okay and what's not okay? Is dignity and respect, a driving force in the community that your child is in? I think McLean does a really good job of this, by the way. Importance of activities outside, like, sports, community-based things, any, music, whatever your kid is interested in or doing and interacting with other adults, having a good connection with them and being able to have conversations with them is great. And I put the opportunity for competence in there because I do think that when kids have an opportunity to find their competency, right? And I use the term island of competence, like we want all kids to have an island of competence, a particular thing that they can engage in that makes them feel really comfortable and confident, like they know that they can do well. And again, the natural resources, in addition to formal resources like, tutors and therapists and, whoever else is in your child's life. Okay, so what are the important things to keep in mind when talking to kids about social culture and about the box? The one thing that I always want kids to understand very clearly, and this is where absolutely, and in many ways, language matters. Kids have to have language to describe. That's why the box exercise is so great, because it's like creates this common language. They need to understand what is bullying. How is it different from just a normal conflict? And by the way, when I do the box exercise, I explain to them that so much importance in the box is how social aggression occurs. Because people are fighting to get in or trying to bump somebody out. And what that ends up looking like is bullying or socially aggressive behavior. So having too much value on that box is what drives people to engage in these behaviors. So I've always said, like, I really don't believe in bullies, characterological bullies. I mean, as people grow up and they, maybe could become sociopathic or whatever. But, kids are still developing. And I'm not a big believer in identifying, any kid as a bully. I've always said that bullying happens in the context of social culture. And we need to understand why those behaviors occur and how they occur. I explain to kids there are 3 things that make a bullying behavior bullying. Number 1, it's repeated. And that doesn't mean just by you, just by one kid. Because every kid knows which kid is getting picked on. And so even if you've only done it once, if you know that Jimmy, got harassed down the hall by 3 other people before he got to you, you can't say, well, I only did it once. No, you know that his experience is repeated. That the experience of the person on the receiving end is a repeated experience. That the second one is an unequal level of feelings. So this gets actually kind of tricky with boys because boys are really compelled to laugh it off or hide how they feel. And so the boy who's dishing it out doesn't always know that the boy on the receiving end is feeling hurt by it because the boy on the receiving end is so constricted by boy culture that he can't actually express what is true for him. But basically, if one person thinks it's hilarious and the other person is hurt. And the third one is an imbalance of power, which can mean social power, it can mean physical power, it can mean intellectual power, it can mean any kind of what makes one person more powerful than another. So kids need to understand how that happens. I also like to discuss appropriate uses of power with kids because the reality is there are kids in all these communities who are socially more powerful than some of the others. And I say it's not about, accepting, we have to accept the hierarchy. But it's about helping kids understand that given the reality, they have greater responsibility. The kids who have social power have a greater responsibility in the community to set a tone. Because everyone's watching them to see what they're thinking, doing, feeling, saying, and how they're treating people. And so I've never shied away from being honest with people about, look, you're in a position of power in this community and you know it. But that means you have a greater responsibility in how you use it. Yes.
But how do you tell them that?
They know it already.
I know, but how do you say to them you have a greater responsibility in the context in which they're seeing adults constantly abusing the power that they have, including sometimes over them?
Yes.
What do you tell them to do about that? I think we set bad examples.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And that's why I put the whole piece on school climate and culture in here. Because schools have a responsibility, and we as parents have a responsibility to hold schools accountable for engaging in responses and setting up systems that create a culture that is devoted to dignity for all. regardless of what you believe, regardless of what your beliefs about homosexuality or heterosexuality or, gender neutrality and all of these, kids are exploring gender in all kinds of different ways now. Whatever, it doesn't matter what you believe. Everybody needs to be on the same page with regard to humanity equals the right of dignity. Period. And cultures need to reinforce that. Yeah.
I was going to also add, but before it even starts at the school, it's at our homes.
Yeah.
We need to own it, and we need to walk the walk.
That's right.
And if we don't, we can't hold the school accountable or
That's
others,
right.
because it's our kids.
Absolutely.
We must walk the walk.
It's such a great point. It's like we all can only do what we can do and do the best we can do, but we should. We should do the best we can do. All the time. And we should treat our kids with dignity and respect. And you can do that while simultaneously setting a limit that they don't like. They're not mutually exclusive. So, yes. And the other thing, too, one of the other things on here is reinforce family values. So we want kids to have a very strong and sturdy moral compass. We want them to know where their morality is. And the way to do that is to reinforce family values. And you can say, every kid should be able to answer the question, what are the 3 most important values in your family? And every family member should be sort of fairly consistent in their answer. Go home and ask your kids. Out of curiosity, what do you think the 3 most important family values are in our family? See what they say. These are good conversations to have, and that creates this core, something to always come back to, which feeds the moral compass. So that's a great point. We all have to work together and we all have to partner, and nobody's job is easy, trust me. Doesn't matter if you're on the parent end of it or the school end of it or the whatever. Raising kids is hard, and we have to work together to do it. Otherwise, I don't even know where it leaves us. So, yes, we need to model, for sure. Encourage acceptance of differences and empathy for others, and that's what I mean when I talk about, valuing dignity. No matter how you feel about any particular given issue, lifestyle, however you want to define it, dignity for all. Knowing your kids' friends is really helpful because you can begin to anticipate motivations of why kids do what they do, and you can begin to sort of guide your child and steer your child based on, not puppeteering from the behind the scenes, because as kids get older, that doesn't work. They have to be empowered to make their own decisions about things and, make the best decisions they can make in as many of the situations as they possibly can. And the way to empower them to do that is to help them be thoughtful about these processes and their, culture and context. So the other thing is, this is a whole separate program on with regard to technology, but kids are socializing so much online that it's really important not to neglect those conversations. And, how are they using technology? Who are they in communication with? How do they treat each other, on Facebook or, Instagram or whatever it is they're using, texting, etc., and have conversations. What do you think is the number one reason why kids won't tell their parents when something bad happens with the technology?
Could be taken away.
Yeah, they're really afraid that the first step is going to be that it's going to be gone. If you want your kids to talk to you, you got to find a balance. Yeah, you got to find a balance between, conversations, limitations, contingencies, and all or nothing responses. The all or nothing responses are usually just do not go over well. So, raise your hand if you've ever been in this dilemma. Your kid has some kind of social difficulty and you're trying to figure out, do I let them handle it on their own or do I get involved? Right. This is a hard decision. There is not one hard and fast right answer. But there are some things to consider when you're thinking about how to handle certain things. And unless a situation is literally in the moment, life or death, time is on your side. Just like I use that as a parent to remind myself to not be reactive. Not that I'm 100% perfect, but you know, I try to say, okay, this is not, like, my kid's not going to die right this second. So let me, you know, I can think it through. So once you get past your desire to put your hands around another child's neck, because we've all had that feeling. Once you get past that, then you can really be thoughtful and think about how do I handle this? And how do I, and you know, aside from kids who are really young, older kids, even 4th, 5th, and up, need to have a say in how, and even the younger kids, some appropriate say in how things are going to get handled. They need to feel in on it. They need to feel like you're not just taking over, because you can't be out there with them. So the first defense is to empower your child to handle it on their own, or with whatever appropriate support may be helpful. School counselor or a teacher or whatever. We want kids to learn how to problem solve, and this requires a leap of faith on parents' part for sure. But we really want kids to be able to use the skills that they, you know what I mean, to develop and use skills that are going to be really critical and important to them. So, and the other piece is to, again, I mean, whatever, you need to know your own child, you need to know the age of your child, you need to know what they can handle. Create open lines of communication with your child. So all the stuff that we talked about, if you come at things from a curiosity standpoint, hey, let's look at this, let's talk about this, let's go through this standpoint, you want to know all the pieces. And you want to know what role your child may or may not play in the whole dynamic. Not from a blaming standpoint, but if we're going to hold other kids accountable, we need to hold our own kids accountable for making decisions that are in their interest and in other kids' interest. So keep your relationship with your child in mind. That means trust is really important. If you tell your child that you're not going to talk to another parent, and you do, and it comes back to you, you have damaged your trust with your child, and they're likely not going to talk to you about the next situation. Now, if you feel really strongly that the school needs to know, or another parent needs to know, or you need to make that call, talk it through with your child and give them as much input in how things get done as possible. The situations that you want to really more intervene in and be, you know, sort of override your child, but with their knowledge, are situations where your child has tried to handle it by themselves and it's not getting better, or it's getting worse really quickly, or somebody's in danger, or significant functioning has diminished. Your child refuses to go to school because of the situation. Those are good, you know, markers to ask yourself, are these things happening? So that's maintain trust through respecting their feelings. So you can override them, but you can also validate how they feel about it. Use supportive in their adults in their lives for assistance. We talked about that. I'm a believer, again, that the adults all need to be working together and be in communication, have a good, you know, collaborative relationship with each other, which includes maintaining open communications with the school. And we talked about the last one. That's when you intervene, is when those factors are occurring. Any questions on that or comments? Yes?
What happens if your child won't talk to you? I mean, it just seems like these are all times, but if there's
yes.
I mean, they think that they know everything.
Yes.
They don't want to share things with you, and
I would say be persistent, but not pushy or hovering. That's hard. This is why for like the parents in the room who have younger kids, you want to plant seeds and start having conversations with them early on so that they get used to talking to you about things and know that your response is not going to be overly reactive or abrupt or, you know, an all or nothing response or catch them off guard in some way. But, you know, some kids really aren't as communicative or don't have the skills to express it exactly the way they're feeling it. And those are the ones you just kind of have to chip away at it, little bit by bit by bit. And if things, I mean, you don't want it to get to the point where they're, you know, feeling like things are so bad. But if things become uncomfortable enough, then you gotta address it. And then you can take them to, like, let's go talk to the school counselor together, or let's go, whatever, maybe. You have to be creative.
I think finding out the moments when your child is more open, you know, like if you go, when they're younger too, laying in
Yes.
bed with them before they go to sleep, they'll
Yes.
spill their guts.
That's right.
Or in a car for a while.
That's right. Absolutely. Timing is everything.
And I've taken my daughter, we've gone and had a chat at Panera's.
Yes. Right, so then you're out of your normal environment.
And let's have her.
Yes, that's a great idea. You know, let's go get some frozen yogurt or some ice cream or some whatever and say, hey, how's it going with so-and-so? And see what you get.
What I've done here a few years back to get me to a position where I'm in now with my daughter communicating is I would pick her up and then shut up.
Mm-hmm.
Hey babe, how are you? And then that's it. Even if we're riding and it seems like it's a quiet ride home, and as we're riding, before you know, she was just start talking about the day and opening up. But I had to learn how to shut up and not bombard her with how was blah, 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 how was this, I heard this. Even if I heard it, I didn't talk about it, and I read it somewhere, and I just silenced, and it just worked.
Yeah.
And once I stopped talking, she began to open up, and we've been doing this for the past few years, but now it's at a point where she's so open, and we've always communicated well, but it was me just shutting up in the beginning instead of bombarding her and questioning her about everything.
That is such an important strategy.
Mm-hmm.
It's critical, and it's so hard to do, especially for the moms in the room, and dads too sometimes, but you know, we tend to want to get at it quickly, and we have to engage in patience. Zip it and let it come out in drips and drabs. You're better off in the long run. You know, your relationship with your child is a long-term investment. It's not just about this one instance or this one day or this one situation. And it's important to remember that. That's a great suggestion. Thank you.
I also find that when I'm taking her and her friends someplace, somehow I've become invisible.
Oh, yeah.
And I try to just keep my mouth shut, and the things I learn.
Yes.
Or my sister will call me, she's like, oh my God, let me tell you.
Right. That's right.
Because of what they're talking about, what they're going to do.
Absolutely. Be a fly on the wall,
Uh-huh.
or you know, the windshield, whatever it may be, and really try and take it in. And timing is everything, even with teenagers. To, you know, when you might figure out the right time to throw something out and just ask a question or follow up on something, or it's bits and pieces, dribs and drabs for sure. Yes.
And I also think that there is a gender thing.
Yes.
I hate saying it, and I know you have a son and I have a son.
That's true.
And I know there's some men in here, but they're not talkers and don't really even ever, you know what I mean? I mean, there are times where I will text him questions because I'll get an answer via text.
Yes.
So I think that for a girl, I have 2 daughters. You know, I'm the first to say. One, you know, was like, please don't tell me everything. I don't want to know it all.
TMI, too much information,
Right.
keep it in. Right, I don't want to.
Please keep that part to yourself.
Right. That's right.
And then one wasn't a big communicator, but I think girls tend to talk more, and I think I don't know how one does it with boys, because boys tend to just, unless they're with others, really don't talk. And I do empathize with you. I don't know the right answer, but I have to say.
Yes.
So I completely agree with the not saying too much, and also I think it's good to ask questions rather than make statements. But I have 2 boys, and turning 20 is great. My 20-year-old has started talking, so I think it's just getting through adolescence a lot
Yes.
better.
You know, people have said that, you know, during adolescence, you lose them to some degree, but then you get them back.
Yeah, they go to the evil island and return.
Yes, right. They go to the evil island, but they return. But they will return if
If the
their
foundation
place
is there.
of, if it's a safe place to return to, for sure. And yeah, it is different with, I have 2 boys. Mine are still young enough that I'm a little bit like, I don't need all the details. But, as they get older, I'm sure it's gonna get different, because boys do tend not to talk quite as much, generally speaking, not to,
The other thing that's been really helpful to me, and again, I have 2 sons, 17 and 19, is I have something that we love to do together. So even when they are on the evil island, we can go do that thing together. And it just creates another kind of an atmosphere and a basis to return to.
which is a maintenance of the relationship, which is what
Yeah.
you're talking about.
And you have to do it in like elementary school or middle school. You really have to establish that, because high school, it's too late if you don't have
Right,
that
it's
thing.
true. And what you're speaking to is, it's action oriented.
Yeah.
It's doing something.
Yep.
And think of it like metaphorically, I'm thinking that you've created a bridge from home base to Evil Island
Mhm.
through that activity,
Yeah.
which is amazing.
Yeah, it's not often,
Yeah.
but it's enough that you don't feel like they're completely silent.
Oh, right, no,
Which
we
is
do
great,
have that, but I
yeah.
just think that,
Yeah, it's tough.
Good points, yes.
Sometimes it's hard, like with teenagers, they're so awake late at night,
And you're not.
That's when I'm turned off. Yeah, and sometimes that's when they want to talk, and that's when they want to open up, and it's like, can we finish this tomorrow morning? And it won't happen,
You know what? I think use it as to be as balanced as you can. If you know there's something really critical going on, I think we have to do everything we can do, like put toothpicks in your eyes and listen. Because there may not come another, like the morning may not happen, but we can't do that all the time. It's too taxing, I think, on us and our own cycles. So it is just kind of like a give and take, and that's a good point. So just remember that our teenagers and kids are like a puzzle, and there's all these different pieces to the puzzle, and we have to be able to really put them all together to be effective. So thank you all so much for your input, and